I am Julie Mock. I'm the Conservation Director for the Colorado Mountain Club. For those of you I haven't met, it's good to meet you virtually. In this pandemic time, we're doing lots of Zoom meetings, and appreciate your willingness to be present with us tonight. Really excited to talk tonight about 14er access and how that interplays with private lands and the Forest Service, particularly up in Park County in the Lincoln Democrat-Ross area. And we've got some experts, some local landowners, as well as a Forest Service representative who are going to talk through some of the challenges that they're facing with recreation access to those 14ers and some of the potential opportunities and solutions that they've come up with so far that they may be looking to in the future. They're going to go through and do a series of quick presentations, and then again we'll have quite a bit of time at the end for questions. So put those into the chat box and we'll go ahead and get started. Patrick is our first presenter tonight. He's one of the landowners and is going to talk to us about some of the legal aspects of 14er access. Patrick?
Yeah, good evening. Thank you all for joining. My name is Patrick Shilkin. I'm speaking from my satellite office at Del Norte, Colorado. I am actually an attorney by trade, but I'm speaking in an area that is clearly not in an area I practice in, but I have a very keen interest in it. I am a fourth generation Colorado native, have lots of roots in this state that extend to all four corners, and represent a number of individuals, both in industry, farming, and ranching. And I have a very good feel for the land, but I've never really stepped into this area of law. I do own mining claims scattered throughout Park County. And kind of what I'm looking at is the perspective of a landowner like myself going through the process of dealing with the various issues that are now facing us in Park County. Part is I was going to present a photograph I have of my family and I at Kite Lake in 1974, making our first ascent to the mountains. And on 4th of July weekend, we were the only 4 people up there. And to let you know how far things have changed and how far things have advanced, I have been in that area and witnessing between 300 to 350 cars that are now parked in the very area where we had camped. So my presentation really kind of sort of walks through the legal issues as a landowner we face. And I do understand that people want access. I see it on the weekends. I see it on my land. I see it on the roads that I use. So kind of the basis of my topic starts from the point that you're no longer in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. You are really probably somewhere that you didn't really want to be. And so what I'm really looking at now is the kind of the land ownership. And sorry about these pictures, because had we were going to do this live, this would have shown up on a large screen. But what you're actually seeing here is what's known as the Alma Mining District. And all of those little squares and things that are on this picture actually represent privately owned mining claims scattered between the areas of Hoosier Pass down to County Road 18 and from kind of sort of the Continental Divide just outside of Alma. And then if we jump over to the Leadville side, this is just the Leadville Mining District itself, ignoring Stringtown, ignoring Climax, ignoring several of the other areas, and you will see that there is nothing but stacked private ownership interests between Leadville and the Continental Divide. What I kind of sort of wanted to touch on is where we've really started in Colorado statutes, is how and what responsibilities as a landowner do I have with respect to somebody that is walking on private land. And we get into the first statute that basically states that if the land is not fenced or otherwise enclosed, or I have not posted some sign that says you are not allowed on here, law, you enter my land with a license and a privilege to be there. This is an example of one of my mining claims. I would like to put a challenge to anybody on how I would turn around and fence this or otherwise post this, because usually I would run into some sort of wildlife tracking area or probably pound stakes through some sort of endangered plant, and there's really no wind position here. In fact, this area is almost vertical, and there's 10.5 acres up there that literally would be impossible for me to come up with something. Under Colorado wildlife statutes, however, it is unlawful for a hunter to trap or enter my land without my permission, which then puts the burden upon the hunter to learn where they are. That's one of the issues that is going to be consistent part in the law, where I'd like to see the responsibility shift more towards the person entering the land rather than the landowner attempting to try to keep you out. Also, as a mine owner, I also have additional responsibilities under the Mines and Minerals Act and Colorado statute to make sure that I also place no trespassing signs which bear my name and address in front of any open pits, areas, or otherwise unsafe areas. And this is just an example of one of the shafts and collars on my property. It is in an extremely remote area of Park County. I have caught people up there before, but again, I am left as a landowner with the responsibility of fencing and posting notice around this. The other part of it is that we're running into problems with, as a private landowner, is the removal of my monuments and my stakes that do border my property so that I know where things are. And these little stones that have these carvings on it are extremely important to patent mining claim owners. And this really marks my corners. This marks everything that I have got. And without finding those things, I'm really shooting in the dark to try to locate my own property lines. Some of you have seen sticks sticking out of the ground or seen things nailed to sticks themselves. These are what's called unpatented mining claim markers. And again, those should be left alone because those are extremely important for us for identifying the boundaries of our claims. So we enacted several years ago the recreational ski and safety statutes. And the purpose of this law in Colorado is to encourage landowners to open up their lands for recreational use, thus limiting the liability towards persons entering this land. And as I'm learning today, as I'm renewing and looking at my own insurance policy, the definitions of recreational use has expanded to such things, not only including hiking, but spelunking, hang gliding, and gold panning. Not too sure that I want too many people up there gold panning on my own mining claim. So the limitation that we have as landowners is that as long as I'm not charging entry fees to my property, I am limiting my liability by assuring that if anybody's doing any of the recreational activities that is presented on the first slide, I'm not providing assurances that they're safe for any of those purposes. And if you are participating in recreational activities, that I do not assume any responsibility or incur liability for any death or injury. Now, what that screen gives protection to the mining claim owner or landowner, it takes it away in this very next section. And what it says that if I willfully fail to warn or guard against dangerous known conditions, my liability is no longer limited. And I would then be liable for injuries suffered if I even charged to cover my expenses in maintaining my land. So what that first area gave for me for protections clearly takes this away in the very next section, which doesn't provide a lot of assurances to me as a landowner something will not happen. Part of the reason for raising that issue about known dangers, I was able to secure from another gentleman actual survey of a mine known as the Black Cloud and the Ibex, which are in the Leadville Mining District. What you're seeing on this slide is the actual tunnel system that exists at various levels underground. Unless there's a survey made of my properties, I would never even know that this would even exist. And obviously this would create problems in holes opening up. On these properties, there's about 10 shafts that lead down to various parts of the mine. So again, these surveys really only exist on mining claims where they had very successful operations. On many of the others, none of this information is even presented. Also oops, why is this going backwards? The other part of this, I'm sorry about that, is my liability is not limited for maintaining an attractive nuisance, except, and this is a part of this statute that I still am unable to really grapple with, is mining operations that were abandoned due to inadequate reclamation that existed prior to 1977, or I operate any sort of commercial or business enterprise up there. I'll have to tell you, trying to figure out what inadequate reclamation means could be in front of a jury trying to explain that prior to 1977, apparently they did it these ways and there's no liability ensuing to me. But I'm still dealing with the fact that there is attractive nuisances on these mining properties I have to be very, very careful of. Also, under Colorado law, there is an enacted statute that then provides for an ability of an injured party to recover correlated with the status as a trespasser, licensee, or invitee. These statutes were put together back in 1986 to allow for anyone, even possibly under the recreational use statutes, to bring suit against a landowner, even though they may be injured, or we had determined that we might have some protections under certain statutes under Colorado law. And also, something that most people don't know, which concerns landowners, is that if you are under the age of 14, doctrine that allegedly protects us under one statute for attractive nuisances being maintained by the landowner of claiming operations that existed prior to 1977, that theory does not apply to someone under the age of 14. And again, since my first climb occurred at the age of 12, it clearly put whoever owned those claims up there at that time probably in danger if I had been injured otherwise. That provides little to no protection for a landowner whatsoever. And again, this talks about what kind of things can be recovered by trespassers, licensees. But again, it really does present that a not full, clear ability to protect a landowner from suit against an injured recreational use or trespassee or licensee. So, confused, so are all of us. In studying various codes around the United States, we look at the code of Alabama. They are basically stating if landowners open up for recreational use, as a landowner, I am not required to inspect or warn against dangerous activities, known or unknown, in the state of Alabama. That means that this provides an absolute protection unless I set the trap or unless I maliciously injure somebody. As a landowner, I have no duty to warn you of conditions on my own land. And then if we look at Idaho's recreational use statutes, it even goes a little bit further that I am exempt from a warning, have no duty to at all provide for safe entry for anybody on my property. And even though I may post signs, the person using this land would not be required to warn or provide any sort of duty to people using land for recreational use. Now, there's a very real part of this entire plan Colorado's biggest problem with recreational use really stems from the fact that Colorado is growing. And in a 2019 to 2023 statewide comprehensive outdoor recreational plan, recreation brings a huge amount of money into the state, exceeding $62.5 billion in economic output, and adds to the labor force around 18% and is continuing to grow. So one of the things as a landowner that we're trying to encourage is how do we work together to provide access to private property and protections for the landowner who chooses to do so. I'm going to go through this wish list just very briefly, but we really would like to see as landowners changes in the current statutes that would require permission before entering private land, if we could make that work for recreational use. Revoke possibly our recreational use statutes and start all over again by looking at other jurisdictions that do really protect landowners. The biggest thing that I can remember looking at even over the last 25 years is a paid hiking permit system to assist in offsetting costs for insurance and other things. Looking to nonprofit clubs and organizations, encourage the use of technology. And I think John will cover this in his presentation, but it is a growing problem when we run into people literally not having any idea where they are located. So the question that I would pose to people is, would you, if you were a landowner in our circumstance, allow people access to your property? Would you close it off? Or like what we would like to do is try to find an alternative. So I want to thank you for your time. I know I walked through this pretty quickly, but it's just an opening to kind of issues we faced as a private landowner. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Patrick. We really appreciate that in-depth level of detail on the current statutes. We did have one question come in, wondering if any landowners of mountain properties currently have been sued by someone recreating on private property, and if so, were they successful? Are you aware of any cases recently?
In the recent, I have not, because I did not look at the rate of injury, because a lot of those kinds of cases are settled outside of court. Most of the cases that deal with this stuff deal with access where urban explorers has been a big thing. There's most of those end in arrests rather than injury. So there hasn't been enough for me to really go in recent case history to see if there's been anything.
Great, thanks. And another question about whether the Colorado legislature would strengthen the Recreation Act to provide more protections. And that's something that you and I have talked about, and looking at whether there's additional language that would give you the protections you're looking for. Great. Well, thanks so much. Let's go ahead and punt it over to John. He's another local landowner and is going to talk more specifically about the current state of affairs in the Lincoln Democrat Ross area. John, you ready?
I think so.
All right.
We'll see how this goes. Can folks see my presentation?
Nope, we can hear you, but we can't see your screen yet.
Okay. Let's see. How about now?
Yep, now we can.
Now you can.
Yep.
Okay. Well, first I would like to thank Julie and Steve for the opportunity to talk to the many members of the Colorado Mountain Club. So thank you, Julie and Steve. This is a great opportunity. I do have the pleasure and challenge associated with owning ownership of the peaks, basically the top of Democrat and Lincoln, and partial ownership of the peak of Mount Bross. And like I say, there's many pleasures and many challenges with that ownership. Quick history of Lincoln Democrat and Bross and that trail up there. I can tell you that the number of people recreating on Democrat, Lincoln, and Bross has continued to increase each year. I spoke earlier to Nancy Comer. Some of you may know Nancy. She's the clerk in the town of Alma, and she told me there's about 400 cars per week that do pay at Kite Lake. Now, each car may carry 2, 3, 4, one person. So the actual number of people that are up there, she really didn't have a number for, and neither do I. I can tell you that because of the increase in people up there, just kind of wandering around at the time, and the liability concerns, that the properties were closed in 2004. And, oh, let me see. Do I need to change these, Julie? I'm sorry, I am woefully inadequate here. There.
There we go. Yep, you're doing great.
Okay. In 2004, access was closed primarily due to liability concerns. And as a result of that, quite a few folks got together, several groups, along with the owners of the land, and tried to work out a way that we could reduce liability and allow access. I don't think it was ever anyone's intent not to allow people to the pleasure of being at the top of those 14ers. But at the end of the day, we certainly did not relish a lawsuit if someone were to be injured. As a result of that effort, House Bill in 2006, House Bill 06-1049 did start the process of limiting our liability. It didn't go quite far enough. However, the town of Alma then agreed with us and put together a lease. So our properties are that belong to Earth Energy Resources are basically leased to the town of Alma, and as a result, we have the pleasure of them providing some insurance to us. I can tell you that from time to time, I check on with an attorney on that level of protection, and I have recently been advised that it's not as good as it used to be, and partially because of some of the laws that Patrick explained a little bit earlier. Anyway, we did write a lease, and the lease was enabled people to, again, hike Lincoln and Democrat. There was also a trail on the side of Bross, but not to the peak of Bross. And the reason access wasn't allowed to the peak of Bross is that although we had partial ownership, we did not have 100% ownership of the claims that lay on top of Bross. So we did not open those. And some of the other landowners were not supportive of allowing people to hike up there. So through a lot of work with the U.S. Forest Service, the CMC, and several other groups, we agreed to improve the trails and to do signage and hopefully education would help people know that Bross was not open to hike to the top, and that people needed to stay on the trail. Please do not trespass. Do not get off the trail. The next slide I will show you is this is the approved trail. This map was actually put together by the U.S. Forest Service. And as you can see, if you can see my cursor anyway, you follow the trail up to Democrat and then go across to Lincoln, and then you cross Cameron and come over to Bross. The peak is actually here and the trail is actually here. The properties that I own, like the Silver Jam and the Guinea Pig and the Snowbird here, allow folks a route to get down. And then, of course, the rest of this was on Forest Service ground. But since we did not own the top of Bras, we said no, that was no trespassing. You could not go to the peak of Bras. I will show another, this shows the topography of that area. And I can tell you it's for those, many of you have probably hiked it, but I can tell you it is dangerous. It is something that you've got to be prepared for, and you've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to do it right. When you come down off of Bras, down this trail, that is a very steep grade getting back down to Kite Lake, to the parking area. So as far as the Alma lease was concerned, we were reasonably happy with the outcome of it. There is an exhibit within the lease that identifies those things that we ask people to do and not to do. One, and possibly the most important, is to stay on the established designated trails. And a lot of signage was done by the Forest Service and CMC, and I know I was up there trying to help out and put up signage as well, to try and keep people where they should have been. Here are a few of the other things that we asked not to have happen. Don't take rock samples or remove products from materials from the property. Don't fire weapons. Don't leave refuse. Don't interfere with workmen. No vandalism. Please don't alter patent monuments or mine location certificates that Patrick spoke about. And don't park on the roads or trails. Only park in designated areas, and don't set any fires. Additionally, don't approach mine openings. That obviously can be very dangerous. Excavations and equipment can, unless you know what you're doing, and even sometimes if you do, it is still dangerous. We said that the trail may be closed if dangerous activities such as blasting were to happen to occur. Please don't destroy plants and don't disturb wildlife, and recognize the opportunity for electrical storms that occur up there almost daily, and be prepared. And then to respect the national forest and private property. We permitted access. We have the right to deny access. We really don't want to do that, but things need to be handled correctly by people that are on the property. And it says that the trail crosses patented and unpatented mining claims, and they have extensive above ground and below ground excavations. And because of that, there's always a possibility of ground subsidence, or that should be cave-ins instead of caverns, but stay on the designated trail. As I mentioned, Bras is not open for hiking, other than the trail off to the side. And I'm sorry for the age of these pictures, but they were the only ones that I had a telephoto lens on well enough that I could see the actual people of the pictures that I've got. The picture to the left shows the peak of Bras, and you can see the number of people standing on top of it, and you can see the number of people walking up to it. And I'll tell you, every year that I go up there, I see the exact same thing. The picture to the right shows that same trail a little bit further towards the west. And you can also see a vehicle, of which there are no vehicles allowed on the property. And yet people choose they choose not to follow the request of the landowners. And so I did identify a few things that you all can go look at some point in the future if you wish. These are folks that absolutely say, we know that Bras is no trespassing, but we are going to do it anyway. And they don't mind even being filmed or filming themselves, saying, we honestly don't care. To hell with that, we're going to do it anyway. So not everyone in the hiking community is a problem. They're not. As a matter of fact, most things I think that are good are ruined by the few. And the challenge that we have are the few. Although if you look at those pictures, the few seem to be many. Additionally, one of the things that has actually continued to get more challenging is the amount of refuse that's left up on the 14ers. I know I've picked up quite a bit. I did find some websites about trash on Quandary, which is a couple of peaks over from Lincoln. But you can go in at some point in time if you wish and take a look at that. It is truly becoming an increasingly an issue for the landowner with the refuse that's left up on top of the peaks. Campers and hikers again fail to stay on marked trails, and I think they're hiking just about anywhere they want to go, and I think there is a degradation and erosion based on people not doing what we ask them to do, which is to stay on the trails. Motorized vehicles have been an issue, and some of our mining equipment has been damaged and even stolen off of Mount Lincoln. Vandalism continues to be an issue. This is the Upper Hoosier Tunnel of the Russia mine that is located on Mount Lincoln. And as you can see, the door has been ripped off. It's laying in front of the adit. And consequently, it may not be the first person that tears that off that becomes an issue. It might be the next person that thinks that it's open and they can just go. On the side of it, you can see it does say no trespassing, but I'll tell you that is often used for target practice more than it is people paying attention to it being a dangerous area with no trespassing. Our current concerns, I think I don't need to go into much detail. These speak for themselves. Of course, liability is the top. Josh could probably speak to the second issue better than I can. The parking at Kite Lake, which is the only route up Democrat, Lincoln, and Bross that's open. The amount of folks that are parking up there, it's incredible. They park on the road so far down that it actually blocks people from being able to get up there. It's pretty incredible. Restroom facilities continue to be an issue. There are restrooms at Kite Lake, thanks to the Forest Service, but I can tell you there are none up on the peaks. So it becomes an issue for a day hike for people having restroom facilities. Vandalism I've mentioned. Camping and fires. We've asked people not to start fires up there and not to camp on private ground. However, we know that that is being ignored as well. And refuse and trash, firearms continue to be an issue. I think maybe this is a wish list, but I wish everyone that is a hiker or recreationalist of any kind that they would respect the forest and that they would respect private property. Patrick and I'd assume most every other landowner would hope that hikers were held to the same standard as a hunter and a fisherman, and that they know where they're at and that they have the proper equipment to protect themselves. I guarantee, I can't tell you how many times I've brought people down off of Lincoln who are not prepared when lightning and rain and snow hit up there, and I've brought them down to safety. And I really think a lot of it is education and people truly understanding what they're going to be doing and prepared to do so. And I know the CMC and several other organizations work really hard to try and educate folks, but I think that's a never-ending opportunity. I think we're going to have to really work together to make that happen. And the last slide that I have is, this is an Alma quad. You can get it from the U.S. Forest Service. 7.5 degree. And the reason I have this, it does show Bross and Lincoln, but it also shows the private property. The darker gray area are areas that are not Forest Service. They are private ground. And if people would become educated as to where they're at and respect that private property, I think through that, we'll continue to work to try and keep these peaks open for everyone to enjoy. So, and with that, I'd just like to say thanks for putting up with my ramblings for the last few minutes. And hopefully we can work together to limit our liability and keep this open for recreation. Thank you.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, it's excellent to learn a little bit more about the intricacies of what's going on up there. For our last speaker, we're gonna have Josh Voorhees from the Forest Service switch over, and he's got some slides for us too. So John, if you can stop sharing your screen, then we'll let Josh share his.
Okay, how do I do that?
Up at the top, and I may be able to do it.
Oh, there it is. Okay, got it.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Josh, you're up. Oh, Josh, we can't hear you. Are you muted? Can't hear you. We see that you're unmuted, but we still can't hear you. Down towards the bottom next to that mute button, you might be able to select a different microphone.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. We'll get that taken care of. So I'm Josh Voorhees, District Ranger for the South Park Ranger District. And I will pull up my little presentation here. So Kite Lake, as I mentioned, is Mount Lincoln, Democrat, and Bross. We have a small campground up there, as well as the trailhead. Somebody asked about number of visitors. 25 to 28,000 per year is what's estimated to go through the parking lot at Kite Lake. It's gone up probably 30, 40% just in the last 10 years. It's pretty astonishing. On a busy weekend, we are now pushing past 350 to 400 cars on a day, single day. About 40% of the land, the map that John showed all the private up there. Approximately 40% of the land in the Alpine is publicly owned in this area, a national forest. There's some BLM to the south. The rest is private. So I'm not even sure the Forest Service is a majority owner in a lot of these areas. Okay, so some of the management concerns from the Forest Service side of the issue. Outdated capacity, as I mentioned, 400 cars trying to fit into a parking lot that holds maybe 50, and everyone else parking along the road. We've had some issues with emergency vehicles for getting access up the road. Similar issues to that. We have a lot of search and rescues up there. In fact, there was a search and rescue today, the first day that Kite Lake opened, and we already had one. Trail maintenance, legal access across private, as Patrick and John have both shown. We have an arrangement, but certainly not what anyone would define as true legal access. There's the very valid concerns from the private landowners. This one has been brought up. The town of Alma, their water supply is Buckskin Creek coming down that road. Their biggest issue with their water quality for the residents of Alma is the sediment coming off the road from all the vehicle traffic. Resource conservation, we have a threatened species, Eutrema, up there in that area, and then many wildlife species of concern such as ptarmigan and bighorn sheep. The parking traffic, mentioned that one. Sanitation, unfortunately, our only restroom is at the trailhead. certainly not down where vehicles park all along the road or towards the top of these peaks. So where is all that sanitation ending up? And one of the things that one of my employees mentioned to me when I was asking for ideas for this topic here, the demand for year-round recreation. That's a dramatic change for us. The amount of people that now want to climb in the winter, either skin up if the conditions are right, or snowshoe or hike. Now there's probably on a weekend with nice sunny weather, 20 to 30 cars parked at certain trailheads that do the winter access. So what does that mean for the wildlife and other things during that critical time period? One of the other things that's not commonly known, certainly is to John, since he's the owner of the Ora King, our parking lots. The Forest Service parking lot in some of our facilities, including some of the campsites, are actually constructed on private land. So John has been very gracious to allow us to continue using this property for the public good. But, you know, times may change and that may not always be an option for the Forest Service. There's a picture of one of those bighorn sheep. It is one of the, there are not a lot of them up there anymore in today's world, but they are up there. And it is extremely critical winter seasons. Their favorite area is the areas that are blown off. So also some of the easier areas for people hiking there in the winter. Picture of our Penland's eutrema, which is a threatened species under the Environmental Protection Act, under the ESA. And so we do have management requirements for that as well on these alpine sites. This plant's pretty interesting. It's the only population is in the mosquito range in the United States. It's most commonly found in, of all places, Mongolia. So I mentioned some of the issues, some of the things that we're working on right now, and some of our current solutions, some of our potential solutions for the Forest Service side of it, which will involve all of the private landowners. We've reconfigured our campground management to the town of Alma. So the town of Alma now manages the trailhead and the campground forest under a concessionaire Granger Thigh permit. So they are able to collect the fees. The advantage of having the town of Alma as compared to a private contractor, the town of Alma works to put all of the funding that they collect from that site back into the site. So they've been able to do some road improvement work. We'll be upgrading some of the signage as well as the campfire rings and picnic tables so that they are ADA accessible, and that work will occur this summer. They also will be working with the town of Alma, starting hopefully in 2021 on development of a 20-year master plan for the trailhead, campground, and the trail system. All of that will go through the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, so we will be getting, I'm sure, and I hope, quite a bit of public comment on that, particularly from some of the 14er groups. Some of the things that we've done recently as an agency is we've been able to acquire from willing sellers their private parcels, and then so we can eliminate some of the legal issues associated with that. We've also completed some mine closures, safety closures, so we'll continue to work on that where there is willing partners and opportunity. Increased partnerships with external organizations. We've developed that great relationship with the town of Alma. We're working on agreements with Park County for management of these 14ers, and certainly willing to work with other organizations to get things accomplished up there. There's pretty much an unlimited workload up there. We know the condition of the trails that are up there, how much water, some of them become pretty gullied from the amount of water use and the lack of drainage. One of the, in theory, more controversial items that the Forest Service has been discussing, particularly for some of the other 14ers like Bierstadt that have some wilderness implications, but it will be discussed for Kite Lake as well, is a reservation system. That could be a free system, very similar to what the Boulder Ranger District does for the Indian Peaks. And then capacity limit on vehicles within the Kite Lake corridor. So it may be you can only park in certain areas, like Brainerd Reservoir on the Boulder District, And when that parking lot is full, that's a capacity limit for that day. Just a quick picture there of Kite Lake. I thought that was a nice one, somebody walking there in the sunset. So that was what I had to present, and thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks, Josh. It's so important to have the Forest Service perspective on this kind of complicated issue. Yeah, so we are going to go ahead and open it up for questions. I'm not seeing any new ones in the chat box currently. So we could try, if you have a question, for folks to unmute themselves and ask. If it gets too crazy, we'll go back to the chat box. Does anybody have a question for our panelists? We've answered everything. Perfect.
It's really interesting stuff. Thanks for the presentation from everyone, and yeah, perspectives haven't heard before, so really helpful.
Julie, this is Steve. I've unmuted. I want to toss over to John. We didn't mention North Star Mountain, which is immediately west of Hoosier Pass, and I believe that's also part of your private property. And while it's not a 14er, because of the easy access off of Hoosier Pass, are you seeing any issues there that you would want this group to know about?
Steve, thanks for the question. I would say that there are folks on North Star Mountain, but the volume of people that I've actually seen on North Star is so much smaller. There may be, when I was working at the Ling Mine, maybe 20 people a weekend, although that's been a few years back, and we know that that volume may be increasing. I think that the biggest share of folks are the people on Lincoln, Democrat, and Bross, just based on the volume of people. I can tell you the dangers, the north side of North Star Mountain is extremely steep, and the trail up there really has not had the attention that the Forest Service, the CMC, everyone put into the trail on Lincoln, Democrat, and Bross. So it is scary, but it's not as bad as what I see elsewhere.
Hey, thanks, John. And Patrick, I have a question I wanted to toss over to you. And one of our lunches, you had mentioned the Leadville Corporation, the owner of Mount Sherman, and of course, they've been in bankruptcy status for years. But did you want to add anything about what's going on with Leadville Corp right now? I know CFI, 14ers Initiative, has had some interest in trying to acquire properties up there. I think you need to unmute.
How's that? Does that work? Okay. So I am also a stakeholder in the Leadville Corporation bankruptcy. I have a keen interest because of some of the properties that abut to my own in acquiring additional properties to secure my holdings there in the Mount Sherman area. Just recently, the case has been continued yet again. We have seemed to be almost on a 2-year continuance, parties to go up and certainly look at the properties that are under the Chapter 11 administration. The hearing has been moved all the way to August due to the COVID concerns, as well as accommodating the numerous, not just a few, but numerous debtors that have a claim in the Leadville Corporation. There has been really nothing coming from the court about how they're going to handle, if anything, on land distribution. So that's about the current status of what's going on there.
So my question is both, well, I guess it's just generally, what kind of solutions can we discuss? Is it an educational issue? Is it an enforcement issue? Is it all of the above? None of the above? So what solutions can, for instance, the property owners or even Josh, where do we start? What can we do? What have you guys been thinking?
Well, I guess I'll start off since no one else jumped in. This is John, and I guess I truly believe it is an education issue. I think folks need to understand where they're at. As Patrick spoke about, a hunter needs to know where they're at, and they need to know, they need to actually have the owner's permission to be there. And why is the standard for fishing or hunting so much higher than it is for someone who chooses to hike? I guess from a landowner perspective, I would hope that people do know where they're at. I would hope that people were educated well enough to not go near mine openings. But my experience has been probably at a 95% level, there's not an issue, but the other 5% is. So how do we educate them? How do we make them accountable for their own behavior, rather than the law saying that the landowner has the obligation to do so?
Well, thanks, John, and I'll pick up from there. So I just want to kind of sort of state that John's point is very well taken. I'm not going to address the personal issues for land ownership. I have my reasons, and I'm allowed to own land anywhere in this country that allows private land ownership. I probably take better care of my land than probably most of the people I encounter that are trespassing on my land. I go and clean trails, I take care of roads, I work both with the Division of Mining and Reclamation and the Forest Service if there are problems. So we truly are stewards, as many of my ranching and farming clients have passion for their land interests. Someone who owns mining interests and believes in mining, opinion that I try to take care of it. It is an education issue. I do run into people standing next to my several shafts that are still unprotected in areas I don't even know how they got there. When questioning them, again, John's point was inadequate maps, inadequate ideas of even where the trails are, claiming that sites on the internet told them that this was an access point. And I think the educational piece, Michael, is an extraordinarily important part here. It can't be overlooked. Maybe when we didn't have the access to the internet, access to maps, access to GPS systems, that probably was a fairly decent excuse, because even when I was hiking up there, I had no idea where I was. But in this day and age, free or very limited cost access, like Onyx Hunt or some of the other programs out there that's downloadable to your phone or GPS, I really, right now, it's an educational deal. And if someone is on my property, we're in a very litigious society. I mean, I'm an attorney. I see it happen even in the practices I do every day. And people will sue on anything for any reason. And I can't be up there every day because my properties are scattered from Hoosier Pass, County Road 18, monitoring everybody that's up there. There's just no way to do that. Posting signs around some of the properties I own is nearly technically or administratively impossible. So we got to find another way, because as Joshua points out, the increased use is not going to stop. People moving to Colorado, sadly, as long as my family has been here, is not going to stop. So we got to find a solution that's going to work for all of us.
We have a group of people who go out hunting. They seem to be, as a group, better educated than your average hiker. What is different about the education that hunters receive than your general average hiker. Do you have any perspective on that?
I'll go ahead and pick up on that, Michael. First off, hunters are required to pay for a permit to access land for hunting. The entire state of Colorado is divided up into a pattern of hunting areas. There's plenty of literature at places you get hunting permits. The hunting industry has probably one of the best GPS programs out there dealing and identifying private ownership rights. Hunters that I've run into during some of the first and second seasons when I could get up to my Sherman properties, they're very converse in knowing where those lines are, what the gates mean. I've been asked a number of times if I would allow for access to get to this point to where they could set up on Forest Service ground to continue to hunt. And I'm a hiker as well too. I've explored this state in every modality of transportation there is, except for dropping out of a plane. And so the system forces our hunting population to conform to knowing where they are, just by the permitting system, statute that you can't take or enter property where you know is private, and the industry supporting tools such as Onyx Hunt and others are providing information to the hunter.
Great.
You know, Michael,
Thanks for that question and that response. We're getting a little bit over our time. John, if you want to add one more thing to wrap it up, we can do that, and then we'll let folks get on with their evening.
the only thing I was going to add, Michael, your points well made, I think. I understand. I'm not saying that hikers are less intelligent or not as well educated as hunters are. I would say the law just requires a hunter, they're just held at a little bit different standard. Hikers can, and I guess the last thing, we're really, as landowners, we're coming to this group asking for your help and your ideas. The only way we can get good ideas from you folks is if you understand what we see as the concerns and the problems that we face as landowners. And so I, again, appreciate the opportunity, but I look very forward to getting information back from you folks as to what solutions do you see. If you understand the problems that we think we're facing, what solutions do you see that will enable us to work together so that people can enjoy the peaks of Lincoln, Bros, and Democrat and other places without the owner feeling that there's a real challenge to them. And you know, when people will put right on the internet that they don't care if it's private property, I don't know that any private property owner, whether it's a home or a building or a business, would be okay with someone just saying, I don't care what it is, I'm just going to do it anyway. And how do you deal with that? And quite frankly, I don't know the answer. So,
Julie, I would add one last thing. I've known Bill Middlebrook for a lot of years. He's the owner and webmaster of 14ers.com, and he is very interested in helping with the educational aspects of what we want to try to do going forward.
Great.
Yeah, we have the conservation arm of CMC. Perhaps this needs to be across all arms, you know, offering classes at the state level or the Denver level that are specific to this topic. I don't know if they'd be that popular, but perhaps that's a place to start.
Yeah, I think that education component is key, and where CMC can play a really big role in this, right? And not only educating our members, and you all kind of our first guinea pigs in that that realm. But we hope you'll take it back to your communities, to the people that you hike with, even outside of the CMC, to educate other users. And we've talked about, I think they've done this, they've done LNT hotspots up in that area, and talking with people about where they can and can't go as they're hitting the trail from Kite Lake. I think there's a lot of potential there for more outreach, more education in a lot of different forms. So we've got Julian said he'd include it in the WTS curriculum, and yeah, I think integrating it into our existing schools and classes and new member, orientation nights and everywhere we can. So yeah, I want to again thank everybody. We're a little bit over our time, but we've had great questions, great dialogue here. If there are additional questions that folks have after the panel, you can email them to myself or Steve, and we'll try to track down an answer for you. We did record tonight's webinar, and we're going to make that available to the broader CMC audience, and you all will be able to share it. We can also probably get copies of the presentations from tonight if you want to look at those a little closer. So I think we'll pretty much wrap it there. Steve, do you have anything else that you want to talk about tonight?
Nope, just thanks to everyone for attending, and for Patrick and John, also Josh, if you're interested, maybe we can do in a couple of weeks, kind of do a wrap up and see where things are at. And after things from tonight kind of settle down a little bit. So back to you, Julie, and thank you for moderating.